what gave birth to the Ward 4 Democratic Committee occurred in 1963. And it was the time when the old guard was leaving. And the old guard was comprised primarily of extraordinarily competent and engaged women. And it was an extraordinarily energetic year in which, among other things, there was the National March on Washington, complaints about segregation, especially in schools in the South, even though this was after Brown versus Board of Education. And the most important character in that change and in that energy was Tom Atkins. And Tom was a dynamo, a brilliant guy who later was elected as the first African-American to an at-large seat on the Boston City Council and was reelected in 1969. And he asked me to run his campaign. I said, I don't have any experience. I was on the ward committee in Ward 5 at the time. And he said, I don't either. I said, that's not true, Tom. You were elected president of Indiana University student body. You have experience. But that's how that worked. Many of the people who were on the first Ward 4 Democratic Committee had worked in that campaign. We had a very well-organized campaign, especially in the South End, where we had street captains on almost all of the South End street. And we met mainly at 64 West Rutland Square. That was the unofficial headquarters for that first election. When Tom was successful and went on the city council, it was obvious that the South End lacked any representation. We had no representative in the House, even though we were one of a joint district with Ward 10 that had 3 representatives. All of them had always come from Ward 10. So we were put in a position where, in order to be successful, we really had to galvanize the neighborhood. So Ward 4 was submerged, as we would say, in Ward 10. And I started to explain that a Suffolk County Reapportionment Commission was established to reorganize the legislative seats in the State House. The South End was divided, fractured into 5 different wards, and the purpose of it, or at least the consequence of it, was that we had no political voice because we came from different places. We elected different representatives, we elected different senators, and it was very much like how the city was dealing with the South End at that time. It was what I described as the doormat of the city. The purpose of the transportation, for example, was to get vehicles through our neighborhood as quickly as possible. And it made living quite unpleasant. And also it flooded us with visiting vehicles. People came from elsewhere and they parked in our street and walked to the Prudential area or Copley, and then came at the end of the day and got out of here as quickly as they could. So it was a place that simply lacked representational government. And also it was a place that was filled with a whole cafeteria of different issues of crime and grime, as Mel King would describe the two, of schools, although the Ward 4 committee never undertook specifically to deal with that question. And then of the South End bypass that was going to dump 40,000 cars a day right at the end of this street, so that the commuters can get into the Copley area more efficiently, of housing needs of low-income people. The Christian Science Church was having a huge development, which resulted in the Christian Science complex here. They took many rental units along Huntington Avenue. There were several 6-room apartments along Huntington Avenue. So we had a blank slate on which to make an impact. And that helps explain why it was so attractive to organize a Ward 4 Democratic Committee. And one of the main reasons for its success, because we were able, using many of the resources of the people who had been working in the Atkins campaign and who had become familiar with the politics and elections, getting together. And some of them, like Martin Gopin, for example, an unsung hero in the South End, who worked his life on trying to get jobs for low-income people and for minority people, and housing for people who couldn't afford housing, was a member of our ward committee. He worked closely with Mel King on many issues, but we were able to gather all of these people. And if you have energy and you have desire, you're going to get things done. And I must say that in the South End of today, I have been impressed that the Ward 4 Democratic Committee has retained its vigor and has been led by people of integrity, energy, and competence.